I want to ask you about the Dixon matter. Were you able to hear the evidence this morning?
I think it's fair to say we heard most of it, Senator.
Okay. So I guess the question is, what could you have done differently or better to get a better outcome here? Because there are huge losses here which are now going to have to be met by other people that have nothing to do with this particular affair. Last time you were here, we talked about the paltry $7 million fine that you had agreed with Dixon, which you actually made the point to the committee that was not going to be paid. I'm trying to be reasonable here and understand that you can't turn back time, but this could be a very bad precedent for our economy if we end up with a situation that the corporate cop doesn't do what it could to enforce the law, and then you have a compensation scheme coming in to undergird or failed businesses funded by other parts of the ecosystem. So that's my concern. I'm wondering what you could have done differently or better here in the case of Dixon, which for all intents and purposes appears to be functioning in some other guise now.
So, Senator, and as you say, we have spoken about the Dixon matter on multiple occasions previously.
It's a significant
No,
case.
I accept the committee's interest in the issue. I think, though, Senator, if we can step back, because you have criticism about ASIC's action in relation to Dixon, I just want to take a step back and take the committee back to where ASIC was at the time it was investigating these issues. So the compensation scheme of last resort, if I can park that separately, and I do understand your concerns, Senator, or the issues that you are raising, ASIC investigated the provision of financial advice to a subset of Dixon clients in the period 2015 to 2019 because ASIC was concerned that advisors that were employed by Dixon were not providing financial advice that was in those clients' best interests. We focused on the entity Dixon, as opposed to investigating and taking action in relation to individual advisors.
Why?
And we did that because Dixon held the AFSL, the Australian Financial Services licence. So Dixon has a responsibility for ensuring that those that are operating under its licence are doing so in full compliance with the corporations law. We filed that case in September of 2020, so nearly 4 years ago. The court found in ASIC's favour in September 2022, and as we've talked about before, the court imposed a civil penalty of $7.2 million together with $800,000 in costs. Now, that amount that I think, Senator, you've described as paltry was a significant civil penalty at the time for this kind of conduct. Off the top of my head, it may have been one of the highest penalties for failures to supervise the provision.
Haven't been collected.
No, because then what happened, and Senator, this is unfortunately not unusual.
Business is still ongoing in different guise.
Senator Bragg will just allow
Sure.
the
Go ahead.
Deputy
No.
Chair to
Go
I
ahead.
understand. Dixon itself, Senator, as I know you're aware, and I heard AFCA give evidence earlier, went into voluntary administration in January of 2022. ASIC suspended Dixon's AFSL licence a few months thereafter. It's not surprising in that circumstance, Senator, that Dixon, being in administration, has not paid the pecuniary penalty that the court imposed. In relation to the Evans and Partners, that was the holding company, if you like, of Dixon, ASIC did consider whether or not it could take action in relation to Evans and Partners. Unfortunately, though, the way that our laws work is that we have to deal with the company or the entity that is actually engaged in the conduct. And there was no evidence that we could ascertain that Evans and Partners was involved in the conduct that was done by Dixon and its advisors. We did also investigate the various directors of Evans and Partners and Dixon and a range of other entities, and we have taken subsequent action, as I have advised the committee previously, in relation to one of those directors that we considered did have some culpability for the circumstances that Dixon found itself in. So that matter is continuing before the court. So, Senator, far from not taking action in relation to Dixon, I would suggest that we have taken considerable action, 2 separate sets of civil penalty proceedings, one of which remains before the court.
What about on directors' duties?
Yes, in relation to directors' duties. The second civil matter is against an individual alleging a breach of his director's duties.
And there's nothing else that you could do?
That was our conclusion, Senator. We have investigated this matter, those individuals involved and the circumstances intensively and exhaustively. We are very aware of the public interest in the Dixon matter, but that is where we have ended up. 2 sets of civil proceedings, one finding in ASIC's favour and one matter in relation to directors' duties before the court as we speak.
So is your argument here that you couldn't take action against the authorised reps?
My argument, to the extent I have one, Senator, is that at the time that the
You are making the argument. You're arguing why you've taken a particular course of action.
I'm explaining the decision-making process that ASIC went through at the time that proceedings were filed against Dixon in 2020, in September of 2020, that Dixon was the holder of the AFSL and it was appropriate to take action against that entity.
Okay. Well, let me just play that out for you. So if I set up a financial planning business and I get a licence from you and I employ Senator Smith as my authorised rep, he'd be probably quite a good financial advisor actually, and he went and broke the best financial interest duty by putting all my money into his family trust or something, like the Dixon people did, you wouldn't look at him as a person who has breached the best financial interest duty or the best interest duty. You would only look at me.
It would very much depend on the circumstances, Senator. Sometimes we take action against financial advisors individually. Sometimes we take action in relation to the holders of the licence. It's very much a case-by-case assessment as to who should be the proper respondent in this circumstance.
But why wouldn't you do both?
In that matter, look, I wasn't at ASIC in 2020. I can go back and take that on notice. But Senator, and again, I know we've had these conversations before.
Well, because these are matters of ongoing public interest. This has a very grave. This potentially sets a very grave precedent, which transcends politics or other particular office holders that are here at the time. Because if this is the system that we have, that we now have a scheme that can come in and repay people, then we're potentially in a very risky position, and it potentially incentivises ASIC not to do everything they can do because they know that consumers will be bailed out by this scheme, which is why I'm trying to understand exactly what happened here, because the person in the street would assume that if you have a best interest duty that applies to, or fiduciary style duty that applies to a financial advisor, it doesn't matter who they work for, and they've done the wrong thing by putting someone into a whole lot of related party transactions which were not in their best interest, that the corporate regulator would take action against that individual, and they wouldn't just leave them to go back onto a new business.
So, Senator, there's a few things in that. As I say, if you step back, we do have to distinguish ASIC's enforcement action in relation to Dixon in 2020 and then in the period subsequent to that, to what you are talking about, which is the impact of the compensation scheme of last resort. From where we sit at ASIC, we reject any suggestion that ASIC would not continue to enforce the law in the way that we do because of the impact or otherwise of the CSLR. That is a completely separate issue. If the issue was about, well, how do people get their money back in a circumstance where they have received faulty financial advice, well, whether or not ASIC takes action against an individual advisor or a corporate entity that is the holder of the AFSL, unfortunately the outcome is likely to be the same. If the company goes into voluntary administration, there are simply not the money. So, and we see this not just in the advice area, but across the field on a regular basis.
So who decided then? Who made the decision? Who was? Were you there at the time, Chair?
No, I don't want to speak for Mr Longo. Mr Longo and I, neither of us, in fact, none of the commissioners on the commission were present in
So how does
September.
it work at ASIC? Who makes the decision, in this case, to not go after the financial planners that did the dodgy and to pursue just the AFSL holder, which is likely to go into administration?
Well, I can tell you, Senator, if it were today, then the Enforcement Committee of the Commission would be making the decision based on recommendations from our investigation teams and based on legal advice that we receive prior to commencing proceedings. And we seek legal advice to assist us to scope matters, to work out what the appropriate best contraventions are, and to assist us in who
So
we
which
take
commissioner
matters.
signed off on this?
So, for just as I said, Senator, that is how the system works today. Back in 2020, as I say, I wasn't at ASIC. I assume that the then Enforcement Committee signed off on it, but I could take that on notice for you,
Does anyone
Senator,
else at the table know? Does someone else know who it was? Which commissioner signed off on the Dixon?
It was some 4 years ago, I'm afraid, Senator. We can find out for you.
But, I mean, you must know.
No, I don't know.
You don't know?
It's been taken on notice, Senator Bragg.
Does anyone else know?
It's been...
No one can remember which commissioner decided what to do with the Dixon arrangement.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable that be taken on notice in light of the evidence about, the commissioners that are currently here versus decisions that were made in the past.
Well, I think it's... Sorry, did you want to say something?